I'm chopping up some celery and some onions to put into some olive oil, which is heating, so that I can make stuffing. Now, this is the simplest of all possible stuffing recipes. Again, I have to tell you that for me, Thanksgiving is always an experiment. And if I don't head home to visit my family, and I honestly haven't been home for Thanksgiving, you know, Thanksgiving is at my home now for the most holidays. Every once in a while we'll go and make a visit to see a grandparent or something. But for the most part, home is Thanksgiving. So I don't rely heavily on a traditional recipe that I use every year. I have to tell you, at home, I am a strong deviator. I rarely plan in advance, I have to admit. And the reason why is because these types of recipes are so basic and so ingrained that over time it becomes second nature. You will find this as well. So I am chopping about 4 onions, and I'm putting in about 10 stalks of celery ultimately into my oil, and I'm just going to go ahead and let those sweat. I'm not actually trying to brown my onions. I don't want them to caramelize. It won't add anything to this recipe. So just want them to basically wilt in the pan. And just keep those going. And then once I get quite a few onions in stirring and going and wilting, I will chop a few apples, which I'm actually going to cook in advance. I find that if you chop a few apples when you're actually and toss those in with your onions and your celery, it helps to bring out a kind of sweetness. I also add apples later. So maybe one more onion, and then I'll start adding some seasonings. Now, a lot of times people think, well, why don't I just buy a mix? And the reason why stuffing mix is it never tastes the same. It's really very difficult without adding a ton of extra ingredients to a store-bought stock to get it to taste like, a store-bought product to get it to taste anything resembling homemade. So you end up adding so much stuff that you've pretty much made stuffing from scratch. So might as well do that. All right, so vegetables are in, and I'm going to go ahead and start letting those cook down. This is really low heat. This is not really the time for high heat. Just go ahead and give it a couple seconds. Let it take its time. It's not going to like spit at you or get very exciting. It's going to seem, oh, so boring. But that's fine because you've got other things you can take care of while that's going. So if you want to use some garlic, chopped garlic, you want to add that in when you add in your celery. I'm going to go ahead and use granulated garlic. They go in at about a teaspoon ratio to a piece. So a teaspoon of granulated garlic is the equivalent of a clove of garlic, and I want to put in 3 cloves of garlic roughly, so I'm putting in 3 teaspoons of granulated garlic. And this is mostly how I cook at home, where it's kind of a kibosh of things culled from memory. But then in all honesty, I tend to cook like 8 hours a day. So this is chopped tarragon. I'm going to put in 2 teaspoons of that. Okay. I'm going to add a teaspoon of thyme. Now, some of these seasonings I'm adding in the beginning as I'm cooking them down, and some I'm also going to add in later. And so they'll make a repeat. So if you're wondering why it seems sparse, the seasoning seems a little bit sparse, it's because a few of these things are going to make a repeat. For instance, the pepper will show up again. But I do like the taste of the vegetables to be seasoned. That was a teaspoon of black pepper, and I'm now going to put in half a teaspoon of sea salt. And then we'll be done for our seasonings, and we'll start prepping our bread. Okay, half a teaspoon. Now give that a quick stir. There we go. Let that mix. And then we'll be back to our bread. All right. So, now this is just a plain old loaf of white potato bread. You could use any loaf of bread that you like. If you only eat whole wheat, by all means do that. Here's what you don't want. terribly fresh, I just baked this morning bread. It's a total waste. And the bread actually is better if it's at least a day old. So you can cut the bread if you'd like, if you want, to look nice and neat. I don't really care about that, so I'm just going to rip mine into shreds and just literally going to pull it apart and then dump it into my huge mixing bowl. This loaf of bread was pretty dense. So if you find yourself eating loaves of bread that are really light, you might want to think about 2 loaves of bread because you want the bread to weigh about 2 pounds. This loaf by itself was 24 ounces, I think, so that's 1 pound and 8 ounces. And then I'll add later another half a loaf of bread or so to get that to even out. It'll be nice. And of course, if you're eating a super dense bread, you'll need less. All right, so just continue crumbling. I used to love to do this as a little girl. My family most often made cranberry stuffing. Cranberry, yeah. You see, I've got Thanksgiving on the brain. I'm just jumping ahead of myself. Most often made cornbread stuffing, which can be made in the same way. You can pretty much substitute any of those bread products in the same way. You would use it in the same ratio. Now that's the good thing about having these sort of standard recipes. You can tell when you can deviate. For instance, 24 to 32 ounces of bread, which is how much, your weight. You can do that in cornbread. You can also do that in mushrooms, if you'd like, and just any sort of bread substitute that you would like to use would be fine, just as long as you kept that ratio. Okay, so my bread is all crumbled, crumbly bread. Okay, and I'm gonna add my vegetables right to the top. Just all those in there. There we go. Okay, now to that I am going to add chicken broth. Now, honestly, I can tell you that you're gonna need to put in about 2 to 3 cups of chicken broth. But really, you want to just keep pouring chicken broth in until your bread looks wet. Now, let me show you. So here's my bread. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. And I'm stirring it around, and I'm just gonna take up pouring some stock. Now, I want to keep going until it's incorporated, and I'm going to stop, give it a little stir. This is only 32 ounces of chicken broth, and it's still dry. I'm going to keep going. Now, if you start off with stuffing, and any kind of stuffing that you use, and it looks to your eyes like it is dry, it is dry. And you're going to have to keep adding stock to it. Even if when you're baking it, if you go to check your stuffing and it looks dry, add more liquid if it hasn't reached the temperature that it needs to reach. Now, at this point, I would stop because I'm not sticking my, if I were sticking my stuffing into a bird, I would stop now. It's very moist. It's got just enough moisture that it's sticking together, it's clumping, and you can put it into the bird and the bird would add moisture. I don't cook my stuffing inside of a turkey. I prefer to cook it separately in a casserole, so I'm going to add more stock so that I could still visibly see moisture. There we go. And if I leave it alone, a little moisture will kind of creep around the edges. So that's what I'm going to pour into my pan. Now, if you like, at this point, you can add more apples, if you'd like, or pecans, cranberries. You can put in nuts, walnuts, if you'd like. You have quite a range. I sometimes like to throw in some dried cranberries. You can really kind of customize this and make something that is very specific to you and your home, because this is your base. You're very basic. Even if you just cook this off, it would be great. And, who would complain about it? No one. But if you want to keep customizing, well, come along with me, because I'm going to add a few more things to mine that I always put in mine. For one, I'm gonna stick in some sage, a whole lot of sage, a tablespoon. I kind of, even though I don't put any meat in my stuffing most of the time, a lot of people do. And part of that taste that they're getting, it comes from the seasonings that people traditionally put in on poultry. So I want to make sure that I have a lot of those kind of flavors in. So I'm adding some more sage. I'm going to put in a little bit more thyme. And a little bit of salt. Not a whole lot more. That's 1/4 teaspoon. And then I'm going to sprinkle some pepper on it until I visibly see pepper. There we go. Okay. All right, and I will stir that. All right, now that's ready to go into my oven. I'm going to bake this at 350 degrees and for about 50 minutes. Now, if you happen to be checking your oven, this is not one of those things that you have to worry about setting. This stuffing is going to be crumbly. If you're, for instance, making cornbread and you want it to be like binded, you'll need to add 2 eggs. I am not going for that. I'm going for that kind of crumbly, that kind of falls apart in flakes, and you can pick up each of the individual pieces with your fork. So I'm not adding an egg. So this will go into the oven, 350, 50 minutes.